Hello, welcome to the Cogs Dialogues. My name is Mohammad Saqib, your host. My co-host today is Mr. Atul Aneja. Mr. Aneja is a former strategic affairs editor of the Hindu, India's foremost newspaper. He is a journalist who has witnessed history unfold across China, West Asia, and Eurasia. In this episode, we will discuss the emergence of a multipolar world order and its impact on the global south. As traditional power dynamics change, new alliances and power centers are emerging, reshaping global politics and security. From Beijing's increasing influence to the realignment of West Asia, the international order is undergoing fundamental changes that affects every region. Our distinguished guest for this dialogue is Dr. Abhinav Pandya. Dr. Pandya is the founder and CEO of USNA's Foundation. He has authored three influential books on security challenges. His expertise in terror financing, radicalization, and regional security will provide us crucial insights into how these evolving dynamics impact global stability and the future of the global south. Welcome to the dialogue, Dr. Pandya. Dr. Pandya, thank you very much for joining us. This is a new initiative which we have started under COGS. This is called COGS Dialogues. And our talk show today, the topic is geopolitics, multipolarity, and a global south. So you are our esteemed guest, Mr. Atulaneja is our advisor and boss. And we have heard so much. It's very difficult to ask any question when he's around. We have learned geopolitics and security issues from him. So I am unable to ask any question. Yeah. So I like to listen to fiction. So to start with, basically to break the ice, how do you see the turmoil of today or the geopolitical changes since the beginning of 21st century? And how do you see the emerging economies and with that the developing countries or global south stands today?
I must say that that the turmoil which is going on right now, this was already present, in a form of a seed in the developments or the events which followed the Second World War and the disintegration of Soviet Russia. As Hegel would rightly put it, that your synthesis is primarily rooted in thesis and antithesis. It's nothing new. It was lying in a very docile, or I would say, in a state of inactivity, but then it becomes manifest. In the current, geopolitical scenario, is something which was bound to happen. It was just a matter. Yeah. So I'm saying that it was just a matter of time. Now, the question is that, see, after the Second World War, they started with the Bretton Woods institution and a global multilateral structure.
Yes.
Which was not representative at all. I mean, in any sense, if you say, no, I mean, it right from the beginning, it was discriminatory in nature and it was heavily dominated by West. The system could survive as long as you had countries in the other part of the world, that is, let's say, the global south, or let's say the developing world. As long as they could tolerate it, they were not catching up in economic and military terms with the Western countries. That system could survive well. But yes, albeit with the frustration, with the resentment among the developing countries like India, because we were not represented. But then now things have come to a stage where you cannot afford ignore and discriminate and continue with this Western hegemonical system anymore. Secondly, after the disintegration of Soviet Russia, the Americans had a unipolar moment. Now, the way they should have acted in that unipolar moment in a very different manner. But as the American deep state would have it, their basic and the absolute idea, the absolute goal is power maximization. So they are present like around every nook and cranny of the world. And the way they reacted after that, trying to corner Russia and in various zones, also intervening in various parts of the world, that could sustain as long as Russia was lying dormant, or as long as was Russia was able to gather its strength. The moment the things became a little intolerable and Russia became stronger, China became stronger, certainly that order was bound to be challenged, and we saw that challenge has already come, and these things are already unfolding. So this current turmoil in geopolitics is something which any keen observer of geopolitics would have predicted long back, and a system which is entirely hegemonical, where the rulers, the states, act for predatory, totalitarian reasons, for profit maximization, completely ignoring the ethical and humanitarian considerations. That is bound to be challenged and dismantled. This is happening right now.
Yeah, I think Dr. Pandya has made some very interesting points. You see, he's talked about the era of bipolarity, which starts after 1945, right? And then if we fast forward that, we come to 1991, the collapse of the Soviet Union, the so-called unipolar moment, right? And there were philosophers, thinkers, writers who sort of gave an ideological foundation to unipolarity. People like Francis Fukuyama. I mean, his whole book, This is the End of History. But right then itself, there was a counter narrative started. I think you have the Clash of Civilizations book. I think the name of the author right now, Samuel Huntington. Huntington gave a counter view. He said that it is not a unipolar moment really, but it is the emergence of multipolarity. In fact, his book talks about that in the future, his prediction was that multipolarity is bound to be arise, and it's going to be anchored to civilizational states. Very interesting. And he named 5, 6, at least 10 civilizations, starting from China, India, Iraq, Persia, etc. So you could see that the counter narrative had begun. But I would now, we talked about the unipolar moment. I want to talk about the multipolar moment. I would trace it to 2011 during the course of the Arab Spring. And to really nail it down, it would be October 24th, 2011, the day Gaddafi was killed in Libya, because that is a turning point. Because, till that time, both the Chinese and the Russians, about to which Dr. Pandya alluded, were abstaining in the UN Security Council while this series of regime changes were going on. But when Gaddafi was gone, they reversed their stance. They started vetoing any resolution which would call, let's say, for no-fly zone. The case in point is Syria. So, the Chinese and Russians realized that they cannot allow these regime changes to take place, and we got to fight back. So you have the Russian Air Force going into Syria, trying to protect, and that's been the case. Bashar al-Assad, till today, is in place after that multipolar moment. And then you also decide that you need collaboration. So the Chinese and the Russians together, they were already there by this time. By 2011, the SCO had been formed. So Shanghai Cooperation Organization had come. By 2009, BRICS had come into place. So there was a structure, alternative structure, which was sort of lying low, but which was sort of asserting itself. So that's where the momentum shifts from 2011 onwards. And today, as we know, the multipolar world has emerged. It is based on what Huntington had predicted, and which Alexander Dugin further developed that idea in his fourth political theory. About the idea, the theory of a multipolar.
What does he say?
He says that multipolar world would be anchored not to the theory of liberalism, nationalism, or communism, but there will be a fourth current, ideological current, which will bind the multipolar world.
अरे ये क्या हो गया? कहाँ है इनको? हो गया.
So Dugin works is still a work in progress. That you know what is not right, which is the three ideologies. But the fourth political theory is something which other scholars are, Martin Jacques, who wrote this book, When China Rules the World, he's one of it. Zhang Weiwei in China is working on it. And I'm sure it's time that Indian civilizational ethos also comes into play to define an ideology for the multipolar world. So here we are. If you take a broad sweep from what Dr. Pandya said, Bretton Woods, Second World War, unipolar movement, now the multipolar movement, work in progress. And that is why, Dr. Saqib, what you had said in the beginning, that this is an era of great turmoil. because it's not settled. The contradictions between unipolar and multipolar have not been resolved. So, and that is really leading to this friction and chaos which you find all over.
Yeah. But I mean, just as of bring it today, the multipolar, who are going to be the poles in a multipolar world? This is number one, the people have this question. The other thing, Dr. Pandey, the people have been talking is that now there is regrouping is emerging. The people, I mean, after this, the unipolarity is going to go away. There are new groups which are emerging. People talk about like China, Iran, Russia, Saudi Arabia, and maybe Qatar and Brazil coming together and all. So how it is going to take place? I mean, whether this is a kind of a temporary alignment or there could be something permanent, because I mean, people say that probably like bipolarity is not possible anymore. So there has to be now multipolarity. And how this friction, I mean, all these poles have frictions within themselves and across each other. So how will it settle? This is for both of you.
Yeah. Go ahead, Dr.
Yeah, I guess, I think, we are looking at these new alignments and new structures which are coming forth. But I guess, to have a better and a nuanced understanding of these developments, I think we need to explore, investigate, and, deepen our understanding of the idea of multipolarity. Now, in my opinion, multipolarity is something which is an inherent state of affairs, which is natural. It implies diversity. It implies essentially a democracy. Now, the Western liberal system, though it talks a lot about democracy and plurality, but in essence, it became a very dictatorial system, imposing the same set of universal values across the world. A political domination, military domination, economic structures which became highly exploitative and very discriminatory in nature. That is something which is bound to be challenged because it is not a natural state. Now, when we talk about multipolarity, multipolarity has various dimensions. Multipolarity of political power. So, in the political domain, we see that these states like Russia, India, China, US, for example, they emerge as the four pillars of the multipolar world order in geopolitical terms. Then you have the multipolarity in the economic domain. You also challenge or try to alter the Western hegemony in the economic domain. You have new structures coming up like your BRICS, and your Asian Infrastructure Development Bank, and your new geostrategic projects like whole BRI thing, INSTC. This is something like creating alternate economic structures because the structures and the regime which was created by the West, dominated, regulated by the West, failed to satisfy the desires and the aspirations of the larger chunk of the world, that is global South. The kind of loans which they gave and the politically loaded motives which were associated with them, the kind of value system which they tried to propagate with all those economic largesse, the conditionalities which were attached with them, they turned out to be very costly and very damaging. Now, at a third level, multipolarity is also about the multipolarity of ideas. You cannot have the same liberal Western democratic system imposed all over the world. When you try to impose a woke culture, destroying traditional societies, destroying, systems and religious, spiritual systems across the world, it doesn't work because it is not natural. Diversity is essentially the basic characteristic of the human society. So in a multipolar world, what we propose is that, we are not imposing our ideological thought process, or like, let's say that, this whole idea of, transgender LGBTQ activism on the other countries. The other countries have their own traditional systems, and they continue to flourish with that. They dwell in that. The Western order, if they have a certain set of beliefs, they can continue to hold with that. They're perfectly fine with that, but they don't, they're not acceptable if they try to impose the same set of things in countries like India, in countries like China, that too through some kind of dubious organizations like Open Society Foundation, etc., who work in to promote democracy, or like organizations working in the civil society domain, creating sabotage, disturbing your social harmony, creating communal fault lines, widening social and religious fault lines, regional fault lines, ideological divides. That is not acceptable in a multipolar world order. Multipolar world order respects tradition, civilization, and your cultural, your religious, your spiritual identity. What China says, that's a very oriental power, with a rich history, with a long civilization. Likewise, India is also a civilizational state. Russia is also a civilizational state. Multipolar world has a space for these different cultures, civilizations to coexist, to cohabit without interfering in each other's business or without being a bully for the others.
Yeah, very interesting points which Dr. Pandya has made. First of all, what is the structure of the multipolar world, right? Now we were looking at taking off from what Dr. Pandya was saying, that essentially, to get an identity of yours, which is non-liberal, non-Western, is a very important project. And that is the reason that there's a natural impulse to go civilization, to go into your own historical roots, to find your own identity. If you've been a frequent traveler to China, you have seen how the Chinese identity is changing. I don't really see them as a communist party, really.
Yeah.
Because behind that is a very strong Confucian stroke Buddhist, Taoist culture.
Yeah.
And the red of communism is actually the red of Confucianism. So you have there, and Xi Jinping, frankly, when I went there as a correspondent out there, I was, surprised as the effort being put to revive your traditional values. Because again, when I went, it was 2014. So this project was already on to give your multipolar world, that is China being one of the poles, a very distinct cultural identity. Same thing is going on in Russia, because Putin and the Russian Orthodox Church is moving seamlessly together. And you find a similar attempt over here. And then there is an Islamic pole, where you will see countries like Iran, you will see Turkey, which are Iraq. Actually, if you look at the Islamic pole, Iraq is a very important and interesting case because of its own very rich history of the Abbasid Empire, and before that, the Babylonian Empire. So you have these civilizations as well coming together into this multipolar system. Dr. Pandya said you can't have a one size fit all kind of of a ideology. Each particular civilization throws up its own ideology. And that's where we are right now. But interestingly, behind the culture element is the geo-economic element, which Dr. Pandya was talking about. Because the geo-economic shifts have started in multipolarity. The rise of China. I mean, look at that. By the time you are in the early 21st century, you have already seen the rise of China. By 2012, 2013, they're confident that they are independent even of the Americans. They become the factory of the world by this time. So the geo-economic shift takes place over there. In India's case, frankly, if you really look at India's story, to me, it really starts with the economic reforms of 1991, where India went into another cycle of economic rise. So you have these poles developing. First, the geo-economic, and I mean it's not linear, but things happen simultaneously, and the geocultural fusing together to give each pole of the multipolar world a very distinct identity. But here is also the challenge, because you're challenging the people who were so used to the unipolar moment. And that's again, we come back, whether it's going to be a clash, how do we manage this transition from unipolar to multipolar? Is it possible at all? Will it lead to wars? Will it lead, or is there a peaceful transition? These are questions before us. But we have arrived, we have moved forward. We've got organization, BRICS, NDB, AIIB, So now is uncharted territory. How do we take this forward now to ultimately make a peaceful multipolar world where even the multilateral institutions are changed, and completely that's what United Nations Security Council goes away. IMF, World Bank. There's a huge latent disruption you can see with the rise of multipolarity. And that's where we are. That we are on the cusp of a big disruption, which will be geopolitical and geo-economic. There is going to be a bloodbath.
Yeah. Like as Dr. Pandya, we had in another interview, we had with Stephen Olson, an economist, and I forgot what term he used, but he used the same term as you said, that the West is using trade West is using values as a barrier to trade. They say that if you will look at the trade, that for example, they will not buy cotton from Xinjiang because they say there's the human rights issues are there and all. So he says this is a big chunk. As you may said, that you cannot put your values on somebody else and then punish, because everybody, we are civilization, we have our own values and all. But then how are we going to, because within the global south, we see so many differences, and that there are a lot of opportunities and there are a lot of challenges. When you talk to other people, probably like India, China together make a very, very important pole. When I talk to countries from other global south nations, they really talk that, there are certain things which China has, there are certain things which India has. If they come together, then 1 plus 1 becomes 11. But if they are separately, then one remains one. So, and similarly, I did some sort of a research study that, okay, how will global south look without the west? You just take out the Europe and USA, and can we sustain ourselves? And it's a very preliminary result, we are working on it. 78% of our needs, whether this is raw material, whether this is investment, whether this is technology, whether this is new inventions, can be fulfilled without global south. It is not the whole sample, but very preliminary. So probably we can be content. There is a possibility that like as Dugin says, there's a west and there's the rest. Can survive. What do you think of it?
I must say that multipolarity is a continuous process, as Mr. Atul Aneja, rightly pointed out in the beginning, that it is, it's a continuously evolving process. Like, I mean, we have reached that stage where we are still exploring and finding the contours of this whole process, the future trajectory. So we will have to define, we will have to find out, how it can work out. Secondly, I must say that, well, global south has internal differences, internal conflicts and all, but that doesn't stop the world from entering into a multipolar stage, because multipolarity is a continuous process. Even in the Western world, you'll see that it's not a monolith. Like, there are differences. Global south, certainly there are differences. But the main challenge that comes to the unipolar world system, it comes from the countries like China, India, Russia, who are emerging as major economic powerhouses, military powerhouses, and proposing an alternate system of not exactly values, but an alternate thought pattern, alternate cultural pattern, a civilizational identity. So these are the countries who are leading this this whole I would say that this change in geopolitics. And multipolarity doesn't imply that we have to completely do away with the West. I mean, multipolarity doesn't say that you have to just crush or throw the West to the margins or put them in a dustbin. A multipolar world, they are also the part of this multipolar world. As Dr. Dugan rightly said, that in the BRICS, a chair is empty where the US needs to come and sit. So this whole, I mean, they are also the part of this multipolar world. And like the other civilizations, other countries, they have their existence, they have their ideas, and they have their, I would say, this a very unique, specific identity. Likewise, the West is also allowed to continue to exist, with their set of ideas, beliefs, but not, impose their value systems. Now, you also mentioned about this China-India. Well, when we talk about differences and conflicts, so I would like to highlight that the China-India equation has two dimensions. Firstly, you have this a boundary question, which is the main irritant, and the main bone of contention at a bilateral level. But then at another level, there is a global dimension to this conflict, which is more like some kind of an agenda which is being projected in the Western circles, because they believe, or some of the hardcore realists of the Western political thought, they tend to believe that China is the real enemy, and this India can be the ally. India can be their best ally against China, because in the Western thought patterns, the whole the basic premise of the liberal Western order is to maximize power, and they will not be content with the very basic existence of China as a regional superpower, because they believe that if China becomes a regional superpower, China would start acting like America, and they would spread around the world in every nook and cranny. Why do they do so? Why they think like this? Because they have executed the similar line of thinking and actions following them from the past. The reason is that they don't understand the Chinese political thought, that they don't understand the Oriental way of international relations, because Chinese may not want to, go for that kind of globe domination. If they are emerging as a regionally strong, secure power, they must be perfectly fine with that. So Americans have a different way of thinking. And now again, coming to the India-China conflict, I must say that, well, as far as India-China equation is concerned, this boundary question is a very separate issue. It is a bilateral issue, and it is a result of some very immediate local factors that also includes, the failure of our early leadership to understand the Chinese strategic thought and mind, on which we can have a very long and a separate discussion. But the real threat that comes to China, it comes from the West. So the Chinese policymakers, through this podcast, I would like to convey them that they must understand that India is no threat at all to China. India is a power. Economically, see, we are $3 trillion, they are $19 trillion. No, so there's a huge gap. Secondly, if you to compare in terms of the comprehensive national power, being a democratic country, we are a much softer, weaker state. We have our own internal problems, and we are not aiming towards any major globe domination kind of or big geopolitical objectives. The real challenge that comes to China comes from the West. So China also need to keep that in mind. Besides India and China, they have a lot to explore at a mutual level. There's a strong civilizational connect between the two. There's a robust business and trade connectivity between the two. Given these two factors, war is completely unimaginable. Even China needs to understand that. But they need to appreciate and understand our concerns related to terrorism. When there are blockades at the UN, level in the UN agencies against some of the dreaded terrorists who are unleashing violence in India, that makes India come. So I think there's a lot of miscommunication and lack of understanding between the two countries.
Let's have the views of Mr. Atul Aneja, who has been in China for 15 years, one of our finest correspondents of our best newspaper, Hindu. So, and he has a huge knowledge of international affairs and all. What do you think of like this multipolarity, the role of India, China, the role of BRICS? And where do we stand today vis-a-vis the West?
It's very clear that when you talk about global South, it's not a uniform entity. I see two layers within that. One layer is that of the emerging economy, and that's where countries like India, China, Russia, the BRICS, original BRICS core. These are for the new world order. These are going to be drivers, right? Now within these 5 countries, I personally see that the core of BRICS or the core of multipolarity will be Russia, India, China. The RIC. Now, if RIC is to be cohesive, then there is one issue which Dr. Pandya has alluded to. Unless the India-China equation is well set, then RIC doesn't, consolidate and give that momentum to the multipolar world or the BRICS itself or SCO. It has multiple implications, global implications. So that is the top priority now. How do India and China get together? I think Dr. Pandya is absolutely spot on that you have to look at the big picture here. You don't have to look at this relationship of India and China in a bilateral framework. That'll take you into 1962, into war, and you will start looking at all the negative geopolitical points. But if you really look at the rise of a new world order, multipolar world order, where the West has been seriously challenged by a rising tide of civilizational states, then your problem is not so much bilaterally, but with a third entity. So that the framework of analysis is very important to get the India-China equation right. So that's a must for multipolarity or the geopolitics of multipolarity. If you look at it, the China-India relation is must. If that happens, then we come to the other layer, which is the global South, the rest of the global South. Then we go into Africa. Now, suppose there are projects to be done, let's say, harnessing the waters of the Congo, for example. If you really develop that and have something like 30,000 megawatts of power, it will industrialize Africa. Something like the Chinese did with 3 Gorges Dam, 22,000. This is supposed to be bigger. Now, if Indian and Chinese companies and Russian companies go together into Africa, that becomes a very powerful engine
Yeah.
to drive growth in a very strong segment or very large segment of the global south. And from one geography, you move to other. The three of us together is the core. So the critical part here is the India-China relationship. We have great relationship with Russia. Russia has a great relationship with both of us. So that will be, I think, RIC idea is extremely important. I also want to allude to another idea which Dr. Pandya had mentioned, which is about the West. Now, you see, if the West is looking in unipolar terms, then it will see the rise of emerging economies, rise of BRICS as an enemy, as the other. That framework, I think, is gone. You cannot look at it in their self-interest. But if you want to be a partner of the multipolar world, as probably the United States will probably be the strongest pole in that. If you imagine a picture of Trump, Putin, Xi Jinping, three of them, and who else is left? Fourth country: China, Russia, India, Modi. So if you have a picture of these four, that is the driver of the new world order. Now we don't know. So you see, the deep state in America is changing. It's a separate topic, diverting a little bit here. But if we can get a Trump-like character on board of the multipolar idea, then I think it flies. But if the Americans are going to their default position and live the 1991 unipolar movement in their ideology, then you're going to have a problem. Then there's going to be a con. But this is where we are. That we don't know right now where it will go. So whether RIC works or whether America joins the multipolar world, it's going to unfold in the next year or so. And I'm very actually looking forward to January 20th when Trump takes over and see where America goes. I don't want to be over optimistic, but at the same time, at least it's not the deep state of Biden and Soros and group, which Dr. Pandya did not mention the specifics, but he was alluding to them. That sort of lies low is overcome, and we have another relationship, another dialogue with the Americans as part of the multilateral framework. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, I think it's very confusing actually that what is going to take place after Trump comes, because there are very confusing signals. And I just wanted to know from Dr. Pandya that one thing is that Trump has said that he is going to put additional duty on all the countries, that 10%. Or 60% on China, and he says that he will put 100% duty on the BRICS countries if they try to de-dollarize or they want to bring in their new currency. There, India also coming. On the other hand, we have this hope that when Trump comes, he is going to be very harsh on China, and probably India can take advantage of it. So maybe there'll be new investment and new business relationship and all that. So we really do not know that how things are going to take shape. But as we know that Trump is very transactional, so probably we'll know when the time comes. But do you think that next 4 years of Trump presidency, is it going to bring global South countries or BRICS together, or they are going to divide it?
It's a very interesting question, but I'm as ambivalent as the question itself regarding the future of the Trump's next 4 years, because there are a lot of factors. First and foremost, I guess the coming together of the global South, along with some of the most influential countries like China, Russia, it is not merely a product of the West's, very strong resistance or I would say, a very aggressive campaign against the emerging powers or these alternate power systems like or civilization states like China and Russia. The West has its own problems, and as far as from the position where I see the American system, I feel that it'll be very difficult and challenging for Trump to dismantle or challenge the deep state, because so people, even very senior political scientists like John Mearsheimer, they have rightly said that deep state is something which is very, very powerfully entrenched. We have to understand its origins, because towards the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, the American policymakers, they realized that if they have to project power all around the world, they need a very strong centralized state. So that's why they created this very powerful bureaucracy. And you have these, men in black suits and blue ties occupying very powerful positions in the intelligence, in diplomacy, in State Department. And so far it has not really mattered whether you have a democratic system or you have a Republican system. Deep state had exercised tremendous influence. And in the first reign, Trump, he tried to challenge, but then, it all resulted in conflict, acrimony, and he could not be very successful. Now he comes with a much better experience. So we are all very hopeful that, he would be more successful with his new cabinet and what he talks about America first. So he has certainly said about the withdrawal of the American from the major global theaters, and so that, in a way remotely aligns with some of the core ideas of the multipolar world, the order that Americans don't need to be everywhere with their army and projecting power everywhere. That certainly aligns, but then at the same time he says that no, he will try to impose duty on all the foreign imports and all, particularly targeting China and also goods from the other countries. Indians will be affected too because they're talking about America first. So these all, the different measures, they create a lot of smoke screens and a lot of confusions. And I think as far as, if we feel that, they're going because, they of their withdrawal from China, in terms of investment, India is going to get lots of benefits. I'm not very hopeful about it because Americans are anyway very transactional, and I guess they would like to take those production factories and this manufacturing ecosystem back to either Mexico or or the America or somewhere close to the American system where they control the supply chains. And also regarding the Trump's approach to withdraw from the various theaters of the world. See, the way they are deeply entrenched in the Middle Eastern conflict, it won't be that easy for them to completely just unshackle themselves from those conflict theaters. So the upshot is that it is going to be challenging, confusing, and vague.
Thank you.
Yeah, you see, I think whenever you have fluidity and uncertainty, along with that, another thing comes in, which is opportunity. If everything is frozen and in very clear cut silos, then there is no opportunity. Coming of Trump is an opportunity. I don't think we should be bystanders waiting for things to evolve. But in this fluidity, we need to shape them. And what do we need to shape? Given our agenda, at least of a multipolar world, of the rise of the BRICS, etc. I think there is one thing which is likely to happen, which is that the Russia-US equation is going to improve. That Trump has already said we are talking in the framework of RIC right now. Okay, one pole is Russia. Now that relationship is likely to improve, may not be as quickly as many think, but over time. The Ukraine thing is going to settle down. My own view is it won't be immediate. It will take 6 to 7 months after Russia has achieved certain military objectives. Only then will they come for negotiations. But you will have America trying to diffuse that. So that's one pole, Russia-US. Then comes the China-US factor. Now that is going to be problematic. Especially in economic trade, etc. So, and there are certain people in the administration who are big China hawks who have already come into the Trump administration. So that's going to be a problematic area for some time. Though I do have in the back of mind the transactional element that finally they'll cut a deal. That is the Americans and the Chinese. But let's assume that the US equation is a problematic. How do we shape this? I think India is well positioned here. The Russia-India track, I've spoken to some Russians. Russians say, okay, we have a line to the Americans, but you have a better relationship with the Americans. Yeah. So can New Delhi become a center for diplomacy, bringing Russians, Indians, and US together? Because we need Trump into the multipolar camp. So we work on that. Now, Russia has a much better relationship with China than India has with China. Already, I'm told that in Moscow State University, there is a cell which has been created to bring out convergence between Russia, India, China.
Which university?
Moscow State University. It will probably work on a track 2 level, We don't know the finer contours of that. But that will be an interesting place where Moscow becomes the center of trying to bring Russia, India, and China together. So you have New Delhi, you have Moscow as a center, then you have China as a. So this is a time of engagement. Of trying track 2, track 1.5, finally with the objective that this fluid situation which you're talking about is shaped in the direction of multiple. Now, whether we succeed in it or not is a $1 million question. But I think it's worth an attempt. Coming to the other point, de-dollarization. See, there are two things which are happening. One is trade in bilateral currencies. I think nothing is going to stop that. Like, we are buying Russian oil, we'll pay them in rupees. and that rupee will work. Similarly, the ruble yuan will work. So that I think that is the firewall. We don't want any interference there. Then collapse of the dollar with a new BRICS currency. That's I don't think it's right now. We'll be able to forge unity on that. So we'll see. It'll take time before this question settles down. Now is a time of optics and posturing. Like the Trump has said about what you said, 100% duty on BRICS if you go on a new BRICS currency, right? Somewhere over time we might find middle ground. Last point, America, there's a lot of internal turmoil taking. You know what Dr. Pandya said, the deep state will not let go so easy. And Trump in his second term wants to do that. We may see a lot of inward lookingness coming into America because you're going to have crises within America.
Yeah.
Black Lives Matter. There's so many kind of the woke culture versus traditionalist. So it's a big mess right now inside America. So we may see another factor which will affect us, which is America going more inward looking than it has been doing now. So that also will have its impact on the final shape of the multipolar world.
So is it what you're saying is that there will be a multipolar world for politics, which will be like Russia, India, China. Then there is a multipolar world for economics, which is like BRICS and BRICS Plus, as Dr. Pandya said earlier. And there will be a multipolarity of ideas, which will be, more civilizations kind of a state like India, China, Iran. And
You see, these trends will move simultaneously, right? Now that is where you have to make sense of it and give it a certain structure and a direction. Because there are going to be contradictory trends, what you mentioned about, and simultaneously we're going to be challenged by them. But I think if we are clear-headed that ultimately the new world order has to be multiple, then the power centers have to change. It can't be one country. It has to move in that direction. Then we can pick and choose and shape it. But it requires statesmanship of the highest quality to make it happen. Because the old is collapsing and the new has not emerged. During this bridging time is the one you need tall leaders, statesmen, intellectuals.
But when the Trump at the helm of affairs, then how do you get that?
Well, he's not the only one because he's only one poll. The rest of the poll gallops, we'll see whether it is a post-West world or it is a world where West is a part of it. We don't know.
But Dr. Pandya, the move from the unipolarity to multipolarity, is it going to be smooth or like you say, it is going to take a natural course of action is going to happen, or will it be difficult? Because when you look at the actions of the West, or especially USA, that for example, there's a huge propaganda against China. We considered America as our friend, but you see what happened in Bangladesh. You see the opposition to the BRI where we have been part of it. So there have been multiple things which is working against the interest of multipolarity as such. So is it going to be like apart from the West, are there going to be internal, churning to disturb the process of multipolarity?
So this is like a complete overhauling of the global geopolitical architecture. So, well, it's really difficult to comment that whether it will be absolutely peaceful, smooth, or absolutely violent. But yes, I mean, certainly, in such large scale, very big long term processes, things happen at their own pace, and it's always a mix of both diplomacy and conflicts. But seeing things from the current stage, from today's perspective, I feel that it is going to be a little more disturbing. It is not going to be as smooth as we want it to be. I mean, you have vested interest. I mean, you have great power rivalry is back in action, and then you have various nuclear flashpoints. You have this nuclear flashpoint of Iran-Israel flashpoint. Ukraine is another flashpoint. Definitely, I mean, we see that it will be. We hope that it will be resolved at least in another 2-3 months. Hopefully, then crisis already started in Syria, in Aleppo, where it seems that the Islamic extremists, led by the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, they are going to capture the power, and if they do so, it will unleash a disaster for various parts of the world, because all these Islamist extremist actors, they are again they have their own world. Then besides the nation states, you have some of these non-state actors, which include terrorist organizations, though they are proxies working of intelligence, working for the intelligence agencies and countries, but still, they are able to retain a space, where they do exercise certain kind of autonomy. So I'm not really sure that this process will be smooth. This is going to be the way you look at how things are unfolding in Bangladesh, in Myanmar, in northeastern part. So this is going to be a tough process. But yes, one thing is for sure that the unipolar world is gone, and that's a fact. And now we are moving towards a multipolar world. So multipolarity is a phenomenon, something which cannot be stopped. It's irreversible now. It cannot be stopped by the American deep state or even the West. West has its own internal crisis. Just look at what's happening in the Western Europe. The big challenge coming from those immigrants and Islamic extremists, who are trying to, will be very dominant in the very short period of time. All their big notions of democracy and liberal free world will be completely shattered. So yes, things are changing in various dimensions at multiple levels simultaneously. So we should not expect this change to be very smooth.
No, I think we got to have a bridge building role here. I completely agree. I remember my supervisor when I was doing my PhD in JNU, and he made an interesting comment. He says, "Course of international relations, like true love, is never smooth." This is international politics. It will not be smooth.
Yeah.
Completely agree with Dr. Pandya that this is going to be chaotic.
No, but my point is that do we understand, or Global South understand, that now unipolarity will not remain anymore. America is nobody's friend but a transactional this thing.
Yeah.
The future of Global South is within us
Us.
and together only. And probably we might compromise on certain else for the bigger things for the Global
Absolutely.
South.
This is
It's
how
my question to you.
No, this is exactly how this is the only way forward.
Yeah.
Because what you have 4 points you have listed are there, they're staring at us right now. So we got to face that. This is the only way forward. This collaboration of the Global South is the only way.
Well, I think, the change which is happening right now, as far as India is concerned, India has a very, very special role, a very crucial role to play in this, as Mr. Aneja rightly pointed out. And this the next 15 years, will be very decisive in shaping, in finally, deciding what will be the new global security and economic architecture would be. And India being a very powerful pole of this civilizational multipolar world order, India has its task cut out. But then for that, I would like to add a caveat here. India needs to fix its internal issues, because see, if you have all those internal, if you are trying to be a world leader, and if you have a really competent bureaucratic issues, and if you have the petty governance issues, infrastructure, it doesn't work. Look at China and Russia, the kind of systems which they have created. If you have to play at that level, you need to create those systems in education, in your governance, in your infrastructure. So I think India needs to get its act together. And if it really wants to do something, then just make some efforts. As Lee Kuan Yew, he used to say that India is an emerging power. India will rise. But we always continue to say that India will rise. When will it actually rise? So that's a question. But this is a high time.
It was really illuminating discussion with both of you, and I'm sure that the general Global South population will be benefited by this discussion, and it is a great insight for the policymakers that how do we go move forward. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sakib Sahab.
Thank you very much, sir.
It's always a pleasure to interact with Dr. Pandya.
Same here. Pleasure is all mine.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right, Abhinav. Thank you so much. It's great.
Thank you, Atul. Thank you.